Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to episode 11 of Might Help, Can't Hurt, Conversations with Leaders, Doers, and Friends. And today I am here with a very dear friend who I haven't seen in way too long, Bill Cumming. So Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Nice to be here.
And the reason that I specifically was excited to be having this conversation with Bill now is Bill was one of my first mentors back, God, was it in 2000 when we first worked together?
I think so. Something like that. Maybe 99, 2000, something like that.
It was something like that. And I remember what drew me to Bill's work was he'd started in the civil rights movement. He'd worked in prisons. He'd worked in schools. He'd worked with military. He'd worked across the board on making a difference to everyone. And I felt at the time like I knew how to make a difference with middle-class white people. I mean, that was it. It was like, I was good at that. But I was also aware that that was not where I wanted the extent of my impact to live. And the work I did with Bill over a number of years was very powerful in that. And so I think, Bill, the perspective, let me give you some context. So we're in LA. Yesterday, my kids, Oliver and Clara, went down to be part of the protests, against the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor murders. And it started a huge conversation, which I think is one of the gifts. And I know it's not a gift, but there are gifts to be found in things, is the conversations that get started. But what I've found is on Facebook and even around the dinner table last night, it's really easy for a conversation to go from productive, i.e. it produces some new thought, from meaningful, i.e. if something makes a difference, it has meaning. If it makes no difference, it's not meaningful. So from a meaningful, productive conversation to a sort of a personal, snipey, yeah, you could never understand. Yeah, you're disqualified from the start. Yeah. And because I know you have been convening these kinds of conversations for 50, 60 years,
Mm-hmm.
That's where I wanted to start with something as emotive and fundamental as racism and murder and hate crimes. And how do we have productive, meaningful conversations as opposed to ones that just get everybody more and more wound up and locked into their own points of view?
Okay. Excellent question. And the most important question, actually, Michael. The problem is that we keep looking outside of ourselves for the solution and thinking if we change something out here, that will solve the problem. Let's talk about the civil rights movement as a really good example. Yeah. In 1964, a lot of laws got changed. When I went to North Carolina the first time, the first place Albert Boothby took me was to the courthouse in Greensboro, North Carolina, where there were 2 drinking fountains. And he asked me, what do you know about the system of justice in this building? And I said that there are 2 of them. And he said, absolutely. And he said, what you need to know is that there is a system here that it's called segregation, and it works right now. You are the worst thing that has ever happened to this place. You may not call the police or anyone else if you're in trouble. Don't even think about it. Anyway, I was shocked by what he said. Anyway, make a long story short, a lot of further conversations. And later on, we opened that program for 60 youngsters at Palmer Memorial Institute, one of 3 all-Black private independent schools for kids of color, in 1964. Ran it for 2 years, and it became one of the pilots for Upward Bound. Someplace along the line, I said to Albert Boothby, pretty early on, I said, I want to know why it is these folks don't want to kill us. And Albert said, that's probably the best question you've ever asked. And it's why you have recognized that you're here to learn things not necessarily to instruct in academic things or anything else. You know, this is an academic program, Upward Bound. But he said, you need to understand what they know that you don't, and why they are so important to us, and why it's so important we end this situation. And and he said, especially if the notion is that you have something where you can quote unquote help, go back to Connecticut or Maine or wherever it is you live. Anyway, so what I discovered is that even though I was born less than 100 years after the end of the Civil War, you got to think about that. That's less than 3 generations after the Civil War, and segregation sort of ended, but it hadn't ended yet. We're still at it, and we're still at it now. We've changed a lot of laws. A lot of things have gotten different. It's the redlining in the banks is better now. It's not gone completely, et cetera. There are whole bunches of other things. But we keep asking the wrong questions. And the way I can demonstrate that is last January, I asked a group of 20 people who had just finished what every person can do, and we're wrapping up. And I said on the last session day, how many of you have not been in a room in the last 3 months when women, people of color, or certain religious groups were denigrated, put down, or objectified? Whereas if any of those groups had been present, the conversation would never have taken place. This happened to be a pretty powerful people, a couple of doctors, you know, people in positions of authority and responsibility. How many of them raised their hand, do you think, and said they had not been in that room?
I'm guessing none.
Correct. They told the truth, 0. Next question. How many of you did anything about it? Answer?
None again.
Correct. Absolutely. Now, you can change all the things you want to change, and unless that changes, we're never going to get anywhere. All the violence in the world is produced by people who don't value themselves, period. There's no other exception or exclusion. Now, I can rationalize violence in all kinds of situations, and in some situations, I don't know what other choices were had, and this, that, and the other thing. But the reason this particular killing has had such a powerful impact is that video showed for a few minutes what it's actually like when a man intentionally kills someone and knowing they're doing it. Now, you have to remember, Michael, that my work is based on some things I discovered about myself I'm not proud to tell you. Wasn't proud when I told you the first time, not proud to tell you now. When my daughter was raped in 1979, I turned white hot red, Michael. I'd have killed the man with my bare hands. I am the cop. That violence is in me. No question about it. That I hope you get a sense that I haven't lost the fact that I've still got it. The fact of the matter is that knowing that was about the most disturbing thing that had ever happened to me. I was certainly concerned about Joy, took care of her, did what needed to be done, all of those kinds of things. And the fact of the matter is, what I really needed to look at is what's going on about this. And because I realized it made me exactly like whom?
Well,
the rapist.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll let you answer the question.
No. Yeah. It's you know.
And so I started looking to make what you know is a long story from which I learned a whole lot. I had met a man who initially had been on the Phil Donahue show. He was incarcerated, never had a possibility of parole, and was invited by a man named Nick Groth, who ran the sex offender program in the state of Connecticut, to come down to the prison in Connecticut and talk with a select group of inmates. And this man, as a child, had been locked in a closet for 10 days at a time. That's where he ate. That's where he slept. And that's the bathroom. So you can get the sense of the room. It was horrendous. And when the children weren't locked up, they were being raped and sodomized by the entire adult community. My God, amazingly enough, he grew up and became a murderer and rapist. Okay? Horrendous. Awful. I spent a day with him. At the end of that day, this is before video cameras everywhere and everything else, and there were no guards around, and Nick wasn't anywhere around. This man, whose name is Robbie, he's since passed away. Robbie said to me, Bill, I am sorry that your daughter was raped. And Michael, I knew he meant it. I don't think he meant it. I knew it. I didn't know what to do about it. I said, thank you. And that was the end of our conversation. But over time, what I realized is that the capacity for everything is inside of all of us. Absolutely all of us. And we keep looking outside for the solution to all these problems. The problem is right inside of us. Now, well, would that make any difference? Let's see. If we really got a hold of this notion and started looking here and started saying things when people started to put other people down who weren't present in our presence, and making objectifying women, and I'll come back to those things in a couple of minutes. If we started really getting clear about that, and you and I and one other person decided we're going to talk to 3 people a day and have them come to the place where they really understood that, and they started feeling good about themselves and they could really do something about it. And they talked to 3 people a day, and they did everybody we talked to and talked to 3 more people. How long do you think it would take to reach 7,800,000,000 people?
So I like the math, but I got a question.
Sure.
It seems to me that often when people hear it's inside, I got to work on me, it sounds like, either victim blaming or perpetrator shaming. Like, in other words, that where people go in their heads, and I've gone both places in my heads, which, is, oh, this is my fault. I need, it's my problem that I'm being oppressed and that my brothers and sisters are being murdered. Or, oh shit, it's my fault that I'm not doing enough. That, and in other words, where people go to is anger or helplessness. Now, if where they went to was feeling good about themselves, I get the math. But that's not automatically, it seems to me, where people go when they hear that.
First of all, you'll never hear me victim blaming.
I'm not.
Stay with me.
You are at all.
I got that, but let's deal with one.
Yeah. Okay.
I got a question, Michael. What's our time frame here? Because I don't know what kind of stories.
You know what? We're going to go till we're bored with each other. I mean,
okay.
Usually we run shorter, but we're going to run as long as we need to run.
Okay. All right. First of all, taking responsibility for something has nothing to do with fault, blame, shame, and guilt. Those are useless emotions, and we as a society need to stop talking about them. Now, in terms of being victims, etc., again, I will come to the place where, regardless of what's happened in our lives, there are only 2 choices in any second. One is to realize that's happened, and I can either learn from it and move on, or I can spend my life talking about the fact that my life doesn't work. Okay. So it doesn't make any difference what the trauma is. My favorite example of that is a guy named Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is about his experience in Auschwitz. He was a doctor, and his family was gassed in Auschwitz. And he wrote the following line in Auschwitz: "The last of the freedoms to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Now, if you think that man wasn't destroyed, devastated, read the book. He was devastated in Auschwitz. But what he realized was he could spend all of his time in the desperation, or he could serve as a doctor to the people that were with him in Auschwitz. Now, the fascinating part of that story is that when the Allies liberated Auschwitz at the end of the Second World War, the German guards sent a message to Viktor Frankl thanking him for not hating them. Now, you have to understand here, that's what I was trying to tell you about people of color and their understanding that not all white people are going to do them harm. Now, there is one thing right at the moment in this country, all black people are keeping their kids home because they don't want them randomly shot by the racists that are still running around with guns in their hand. Let's not be stupid. So number one, this isn't about losing your common sense, but it is recognizing to think that the solution to this is the change in another person's behavior is to miss the entire point. I don't care how enlightened we are, or how much we think we know. The fact of the matter is that if we don't recognize I have to take responsibility for the conditions that exist. Now, do I feel responsible for George Floyd's death? In a sense of ownership, I have to take ownership of the fact that that happened on my watch. Okay. Do I have any control of the Minneapolis Police Department? Not at all. Have I made attempts to get into police departments? Absolutely. And the one time I did it, the guy who was probably the sharpest and most awake police commissioner I ever saw lost his job. Unfortunate, but I haven't been in a police department yet. But the point of the matter is, I don't take guilt, shame, flame, and fault, but I certainly do take ownership of the fact that that man was killed. Because we do things that glorify violence. Not only do things that glorify violence, we continue to objectify women. Forgive me, but these are all interconnected, Michael. It's not just one thing, it's everything. And it can't be looked at in some kind of just tiny little tunnel in which we think, well, this is the issue, how do we solve it? It has to be looked at. And when you said about helplessness, no one is helpless. I don't care whether you're a paraplegic. What was the guy's name? Forgive me, who played Superman? What was the actor's name? Christopher Reeves. Christopher was on my thing. He played Superman. I knew who he was. It was a celebrity, whatever. You know when he really got on my radar? When he became a paraplegic. And when he devoted his life with his wife to learning how to do something that somebody said he couldn't do, and that's learn how to walk. I watched live when that guy with his wife walked in that swimming pool. And medically, it wasn't supposed to be possible. He did it with his will, okay? That capacity's in all of us, Michael, all right? So as opposed to talking about helplessness, you and I don't have the faintest idea when the most important conversation that we've ever had is going to take place with the next person, or might be the thing that allows another person to really get that there's plenty they can do. They don't have to be powerless. There are all kinds of things we can impact all along the way. Probably one of the best speeches I've heard in a long time came from Keisha Lance Bottoms, the gal who's the police chief in Atlanta. Because you can imagine what Atlanta's like, boy. It's not happy birthday right at the moment. And she got on the radio last night. First of all, she got a white police chief woman who kneeled down, started the kneel down thing about the death of George Floyd. And she talked about how incredible that was. And the fact of the matter is, she told the rest of the kids who were throwing rocks and crap thing, you don't think you are saying anything about Martin Luther King or honoring his memory or any of that. That's not a protest. That's not something that has organization and care and consideration. That's just random violence. Cut it out. And she was brilliant, but she wasn't talking about anybody as being a bad person. I think you remember, Michael, before Columbine, the idea of that kind of school violence in this country was pretty much unknown. Yeah. I used to walk into a middle of a room with 1,000 kids, and I used to carry I probably still did it when you and I worked together, a little plastic vial with water in it with a little black top, it was a glass specimen bottle from the biology class. Yeah. And if I wanted to get the attention of a group of teenagers, and usually it was following a school system's presentation on drugs, okay, where they tried to scare the crap out of them and it didn't have anything to do that was reality, et cetera. And I'd walk into the middle of the room and I'd say, just want your attention for a minute. And I'd have your attention if you thought this little vial in my hand had nitroglycerin in it. And I'd let it sit there for about 2 seconds. 1001, 1002. Then I took the lid off and I drank it. But by that time, enough of them in the room had thought this guy could be nuts. And I could hear a pin drop in the room. And I said, listen, what they're trying to tell you is this is the only second you got any guarantee of. Why do you want to spend it unconscious? And I spent 25 minutes, 30 minutes talking to them. I had them in the palm of my hand. I didn't need a microphone, et cetera. And they expected it to be garbage. What they got was that somebody cared about the kind of life they created for themselves, which is what all the other messages should have been about. We keep doing the wrong thing. We did a thing called the war on drugs, Michael. Okay? Right. We should declare that war over, that we lost, etc. It was a waste of time then. Just say no, it was a waste of time, all of that stuff. Now, the country of Portugal has long ago solved their drug problems. You know that?
No, I actually don't.
Absolutely had completely solved it. If you ought to hear the police in Portugal talk about the solution. What they did was legalize drugs so you can get them through a doctor. Anybody who you do not have a hard time getting them. So all the drug-related crime is gone. And they have one of the best rehabilitation programs on the level of Betty Ford and the one up in Minnesota. I can't remember the name of it. Right, Hazelden. And which are now merged. Best drug program of that quality. They don't have a drug problem in Portugal at all. We keep focusing on thinking that you can control all of those kinds of things. Violence will continue as long as there is unwellness. Now, can you ever stop all of it given where we are right now? I don't know, but it sure as hell ought to be our goal. But the only way that's going to happen is one person at a time. Sorry. I wish there was another way to do it. The environmental movement is a pretty good example. Likewise, we've tried to do a lot of things relative to the environment that are good, etc. Now, a lot of the things that progress we've been made has been changed in Washington. A lot of environmental protections have been taken away, all those kind of things. Things are going to get more polluted again before they get better. But thinking that the environmental movement was the way to solve the problem is got anything to do with it is, well, it's certainly in the right direction because it raises awareness. But in terms of changing the actions of individual people, unwell people are still pouring garbage into the wrong places.
So what? Okay. So what does, like, in other words, as I'm listening, and you know, we know each other. I mean, I'm listening as me, but I'm listening as my kids. I'm listening as my students. I'm listening as everyone that I know. What? Okay. I want to make a difference. I want to do something about this. Mm-hmm. It feels hopeless going in. Like it feels like so overwhelming that this generations of hate, generations of perpetuated unwellness, of perpetuated violence. You know, I feel like I'm going to oh God, it's a stupid metaphor, but like, you know, I'm going to a gunfight with a pencil. Mm-hmm. Like what? Where do I start?
Great. I got it, Michael. First of all, there's one thing that you also know about my work, because you and I had this experience. So I think it's okay if I talk about it.
Yeah.
You had a successful career as an actor in Great Britain, had your own comedy television program, etc. And you were starting to do this work and were pretty far along into it. But the thing I wanted you to get, Michael, was that you were loved absolutely and unconditionally by another human being. And you already had a leg up because you had at least one parent who I've met who I know loved you absolutely and unconditionally. Now, whether you walked away from the experience with your parents that was true, I don't know. But you
very quickly, she sends her love. I talked to her last night.
And return it, please. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So, and that your value and worth in the world is already a given. It has nothing to do with the success you've had in this career or your acting career or anything else. If I know those two things, then I don't think a lot about whether or not my value and worth is defined by what I do. Now, when you say make a difference, so I think it's important for people to know that all people are of equal value, but that's not how we treat people globally. So yes, it feels hopeless because the job is big. But actually, if you think about the size of the family, it's pretty small. There are only 7 billion of us. You know, every human being has between 10 to 50 trillion cells in it. All right. And like most things, bodies get sick and cancers develop, etc. Okay. Really healthy people can beat cancer. All right. And lots of them do. But the most vulnerable group in this pandemic has been people who are already sick and don't have a good attitude about themselves and all kinds of other things. And we don't need to look at all the statistics of that. But the problem is that most people have no experience that absolutely everything they do matters. we don't think anything matters. And the fact of the matter is, in every second, I have a choice to make. And that choice is what I'm going to do going to be a contribution to this moment or not? Because anything that I do is either one or the other at every second.
A contribution, or what is the other? Like a withdrawal?
No, negative.
Yeah.
An absolute negative. No, withdrawal is, now, there's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself and resting. Everybody needs to do it. So this is not, you got to go 24/7, 100 miles an hour, all that stuff. But if I'm going to do something, then I need to notice whether it's going to be a contribution or not. And just point of reference, let's take something really simple, Michael. If we could get this out of our society, we'd be a long way down the road, because it's what's causing the national mess at the moment. And by the way, the national mess is not being caused by Donald Trump. I may or may not like what Donald Trump does. The problem is Donald Trump got elected in an environment where politicians who disagree have stopped learning how to talk to each other. Okay. It used to be 40, 50 years ago that politicians on two diverse sides would argue each other tooth and nail and then go have dinner with each other and be civil. If we don't learn how to do that again, what we have now is we got to denigrate human beings. The microcosm version of that is, in my neighborhood, in your neighborhood, in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, if you will, if I talk about you behind your back, Michael, to somebody else, I'm doing damage. I'm doing damage to me, my spirit, the person I'm talking to you, and potentially I might even do some damage to you. Not that I think I'm powerful enough in that way, but it's not good. It's not a good thing to do. It's what produces this atmosphere and thing of violence and denigration of other human beings. We need to stop the violence in the way we speak. All right. We need to stop the way we talk about a whole bunch of things. Let's go back and look at something that doesn't look like it's related, but it's totally related. All the things that happened in 1964 relative to human rights measures that Lyndon Johnson passed. Actually, it was after Kennedy was assassinated. He passed I can't remember what it was called. It had a big public title. It's a big welfare bill. All right. And built all these programs. It's what Upward Bound money came from. It's what every support comes from. And so, well-intended. I sat with a member of the House of Representatives in the mid-'80s who had been in the room when that bill was put together. And you know what the Democrats did? They intentionally designed to create a voting block, a dependent voting block, by doing it the way they did it. Are you aware that in welfare, if the husband's around, the woman gets and the children get less money than if the husband's there? That was aimed at the Black community. There are a whole bunch of things, Michael, that are built into these things that we need to clean up. Okay. The horrendous thing is that it comes down to small things. We'd built this whole program before Upward Bound with community service. Everybody had to do something in the dormitory, in the kitchen, someplace around, learning to take responsibility for the environment you're in. When the government came in, I sat in a room with an administrator who looked straight at me and said, I think the community service thing is fine, but we can't ask people of color to do menial tasks. It's really demeaning. And I looked at him and I said, are you out of your mind? Are you out of your mind? Do you want kids to grow up learning how to be responsible for their environment, no matter what color they are? Whose guilt trip are you on? And they didn't pay any attention to me. They took it out. If you go to a Job Corps program today, Michael, in 2020, who do you think cleans the kitchen at night when the kitchen training program for the chefs is over?
I have no idea.
You wouldn't think it would be the chef, do you? They hire a cleaning staff to come in and clean everything in a Job Corps program. I don't want to go to that restaurant. I've run restaurants. if you don't learn how to take care of the cleanliness of a kitchen, you've got the least amount of learning I can imagine that you need to have in order to do that effectively. That's because this whole thing was built on half the wrong principles. How in the world would you ever intentionally decide to create a dependent voting block? Now, let's go to 2020. This came to, there's a vague possibility that a small investment I made a long time ago might actually turn out to be some serious money, Michael. I'd have to know how to handle money as opposed to figure out where to get the next dollar for the next program I'm going to invest myself in. So I invested about $100 each in a couple of financial investment pages. Okay, good. Learned some things about investment stocks today and all that stuff. From Empire Financial, a week ago, 10 days, I get an article in this, one of their lead people that says, which includes socialism's soaring popularity, one crackpot scheme after another to take money from others, the direct payments from government to all citizens, universal basic income, totally free healthcare, Medicaid for all, and most shockingly, demands for slavery reparations from Democratic leaders. Pardon me for saying that, politically incorrect, but I don't think any alive today were ever a slave or a slaveholder. And if you think we owe the descendants of slaves a lot of money, imagine what the bill the Native Americans are going to soon present about how all that kind of stuff's bullshit. Excuse my language. We're probably in trouble now. The fact of the matter is, if we don't create a way to ensure the well-being of all of our citizens globally, which we could afford to do easily, and is actually economically sound business, unless we do that, we will end up with the kind of situation that's going on in the streets of the United States everywhere.
So bridge the gap for me, Bill. This is what I'm hearing, and I want to see if I'm bridging the gap in the way that you are. So you know, we're talking about issues at a level way beyond the individual. You know, we're talking about
no.
Well, no. Okay, but I mean, governments creating voting blocks, you know, resources being allocated in ways that don't support the betterment of humanity. I mean, those feel like not something I'm going to take care of an hour after we're done.
Okay, an hour after we're done, let's take a look at whether the next conversation we have is constructive in relationship to people, Michael. You'll be able to hear it. Okay, but
beautiful. That's okay. Okay. So that was that's where I was going. That's what I was hearing is where we can start is with our very next action, with our very next conversation. Is this constructive? Is
Correct.
This moving things in the direction that we want things to go?
Correct.
That simple, that clean.
That clean. Absolutely. In every arena.
Yeah.
Okay. Which means I don't get to talk negatively about another human being. If I want to talk to them negatively, I call them up or I reach them somehow and I communicate it directly. We've got one of the things I loved about Keisha Lance Bottom's speech last night, which says, you want to make a difference in this country? Go to the polls. Vote for people, and vote for people who are going to do what you know to be the right thing, not what's convenient for you in your pocketbook. Okay. Right at the moment, we're in a situation, Michael, where in this country, 1% of the people are in control of 50% of the assets in the United States. That's not a forget the fact that it's inappropriate as all get out for lots of reasons. It's not a sustainable circumstance. It just is not. We need to come, and I'm talking about not taking mandatorily money and all that stuff. I'm talking about, let's see whether we really want to continue between the haves and the have-nots, because that's what's going on in the streets right now.
Yeah.
All right. Let's find out what the companies you trade with, what values they have. All right. Are the companies you trade with, for example, let's talk about women just for a moment. Every time we objectify a woman in order to sell something, all right, what we've done is cheapen the communication and the feeling and the around women. You're aware, Michael, that in certain cultures in sub-Saharan Africa, you and I would be completely unattractive to the opposite sex.
Mm.
And I think I pointed
Shocking.
this out.
I know. I mean,
I pointed this out to you years ago. You don't have a 3-inch piece of wood in your lip extension, and you don't have them in your ears, so you wouldn't qualify. Unfortunately, if you look at how we try to sell things, everything is sold based on the fact that this will make you more appealing. This will make you more attractive to the opposite sex, all of those kinds of things. What I suggest, for example, people always, talk about not getting enough sex and things like that. First of all, entertaining a conversation with another person about your significant others, about the least good thing I can think about that you could do. It's denigrating. What I tell people is, number one, forget that you'll ever have any sex again, and start doing as many things around the house as you possibly can, and be as loving, as kind as you can. And don't say another word about either of those things, and see what happens in your life. The macho man thing we got going on in this country, Michael, look at the trucks we buy, the huge, big, you scratch a macho man just a little bit, and what you're going to find is a very fearful and insecure person. If I have to demonstrate to you that, excuse me, if you have to demonstrate to me that you're powerful, then I know for sure that you have not a clue as to what your real value is, because you wouldn't need to try to prove it to me. Okay. So are the actions I am going to take going to allow us to pick things more wisely and perhaps have an influence at a much broader level by bringing those kinds of values more to the forefront at a national level? And unfortunately, this is not a Democrat-Republican thing. I think I'm not a wild fan of Michael Moore. Okay, he allows himself to be seduced into the same bombast that he complains about in other people, but he points at some unbelievably good things. Unfortunately, the Democrats have been doing a lot of things in the environmental movement quite knowledgeably that they knew weren't good things, but they were making a lot of money doing it, so they kept doing it. We need to look at anything we're doing. Is the company you're dealing with environmentally sound? Are their labor practices good? Do they source things in a way that the people who make them get paid appropriately? People are shocked by the environment in China. You know who's responsible for that pollution? Us. Okay. Now, that's a direct responsibility. Have you looked in your kitchen at the pots and pans you have and most of the other things that are made with steel and things like that? Most of them say made in China. The reason they were built there, originally the Chinese didn't make great steel. Now they're making brilliant steel, but they don't have the pollution thing. So they can make it much cheaper and ship it over here and still make a fortune. We need to look at the interconnection of all things. Do you want to buy things from people whose practices are not particularly good? Bernie Sanders went and had a conversation with Jeff Bezos about minimum wage. And 10 days later, everything in Amazon, including Whole Foods, raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour. Can you imagine living on $15 an hour with a family of 5, Michael?
No.
Not a chance. No way in the world. We need to figure this out. So all the things I do need to be about the choices I make, the words I speak, but it needs to come from a place of knowing that this is not about having somebody feel badly that they haven't done what you and I are talking about right now. They've got to feel, okay, maybe I didn't wake up, all right, a long time ago. And I've been talking about people behind their backs, and I've been doing a lot of things that aren't necessarily the right thing to do. But if I start one thing at a time, amazingly enough, Michael, once you start this connectedness dot and that everything is interconnected, you'll see that nothing you do is not connected to the solution to this problem. That the knee on the neck of George Floyd is ours. And it has been all along. That's not a bad thing to realize, but if I don't see it that way, I see myself as powerless. That's the problem. And
well, one of the most helpful metaphors that somebody shared with me when I was feeling just a bit bleak about everything was they said, look, if you've been wandering around in the dark for years and you've knocked over lamps and you've broken things and tripped up on furniture and all that,
yep.
and then the lights come on,
Mm-hmm.
You can sit there and give yourself crap about the state of the furniture and everything you've done and not done, or you can be really grateful for the light and move forward. And for me, that actually landed. Like, that was one of those ones where I went, oh, okay, I get that. I get that I can do that. I don't have to give myself shit about everything I haven't done. I can actually just start.
Oh, Michael, the past has got to be let go of. Okay. If there's stuff in there you need to process, fine, go back and process it. But it doesn't make any difference whether you process it or not. It's over. Okay. That thing about the light. I love the thing about the light. That's what I mean by we live in a freaking miracle, Michael. Listen, watch Carl Sagan's Blue Dot video if you haven't seen it recently. Yeah. We live in a miracle. And when I recognize that and I stop beating myself up, I have the opportunity to do something useful. Going back in the past is absolutely not worth anything at all. Okay. And again, it's a matter of really seeing what the opportunity is in this particular moment. It's not as if you won't have an impact. It's realizing that everything we do has an impact. Okay. We have learned our powerlessness, Michael. And for what appears like strength and power and all of those things, real power comes from an internal locus of control and making the best choice I can in this moment, which is all I can do. Okay. And interestingly enough, that brings us around to the answer to the question that Albert Boothby asked me about why people of color didn't want to kill me when I went down there, because we've done a lot of things that look like this to people of color. We've tried to solve the problem of integration by quotas and things like that. All right. And still we haven't gotten very far. That's because we've missed some things. You want to think about how people of color keep their good spirit. It's the answer to the question that Albert Boothby asked me that question almost 50 years ago. When he asked me that question, I did not realize what an incredible contribution it would be to have at the table of every meeting in the world a person who'd learned to master the ability to see people whose intention was excellent and people who might be dangerous and that I need to be a little bit mindful of. When all the corporate boards were white, they made a lot of mistakes because a lot of people got damaged, and there was nobody in the room who said, you do that and it's going to have XYZ impact. By the nature of the challenges and the suffering people have been through, people who have been through those circumstances are important to have because we have got more to learn from them than we will ever know about those things. That kind of realization comes from, there's another thing that's important, Michael, and that is this can't be about a quick fix. This has got to be a permanent choice on my part or on anybody's part, on all of our parts, that I really am going to create a world that works for 7,800,000,000 people. And if I make that choice, then it really becomes quite easy to see what are the things I can do around me. You name a topic and I'll tell you, give me a category of what I can have an impact on or a thing you want me to think about. And I'll give you an action that's probably going to be quite useful in that regard. Let me pick one of my favorites. There are a lot of programs out there that provide food and meals to people who need it at the moment. Every one of those programs needs to have a piece in it that's built in so that the people who are getting the food have a chance to either assist in its preparation or packaging, the delivery of it, or cleaning up after it. So they get a sense of ownership and responsibility about it, not because they ought to pay for it somehow with their labor, but because that will allow them to have a real sense of participation, and much less like they're being given a handout by somebody who has circumstances that are better than theirs. Am I viewing every person I see through the lens of that they're valuable? Or am I making judgments and evaluations? When did it become mine to judge and evaluate it just because you don't fit my style or because you do things differently than I do? That doesn't mean we can't have a marvelous ideological difference and a great argument about things in terms of philosophy. But the moment I denigrate you, now I'm in deep trouble, which is exactly what caused this situation with that cop on George Floyd's neck. Okay. It sounds simplistic. It's not simplistic at all. It is simple. It's very simple. And the other thing I have to be about it, Michael, is disciplined. This is terrible, but it's fine to love people, and that's all fine. You know, we could put up flowers and as if that was going to make a difference. That wouldn't do it either. I need to be mercilessly disciplined with myself. All right. I've told you the story about my granddaughter and the mashed potatoes on the table, I think, but I'll tell it to you again just for this audience because there's a connection. Susan, who was the first of the kids that I took in over the years, who passed away 2 years ago, I'm sorry to tell you, died of pancreatic cancer. She called me in May and said, I've got pancreatic cancer and the chemotherapy's not working, so it'll be about September. I want to see you, and I have no intention of spending the next 3 months talking about how shitty it is that I've got cancer. I'm going to acknowledge the fact that I've created a wonderful life and enjoy seeing who I can, and that'll be it. Well, I couldn't have asked for much better of a statement on someone's part, but anyway. Susan called me when Amy was maybe 2 or 3 and said, can you watch Amy? And we always said yes to that. She said, but I got to tell you, she's learned how to throw food. Don't worry about it. Just bring her, Susan. So she said, but Bill, you need to understand it's really going to happen. I said, I got it, Susan. When you lived here, was everything okay? Did things work okay? She finally brought Amy. To make a long story short, we're sitting there. My dad's at the table, my 2 high school age kids. And I see that Amy's pushing the food around on the plate. So you know dinner's almost over, right? But the fact of the matter is when they start doing that, that's when I figured it would happen. But I just finished the conversation with Neville just a little bit, and out plunks the mashed potato. Okay, I waited just a little bit too long. So I gathered up the mashed potatoes, and I gathered up Amy in the plate and went to put her down. This is a child that almost never cried. She started to caterwaul like you can't imagine. I want my dessert. I'm not done. All of this, that, and the other thing. I said, Amy, now you got another choice to make. If you're so tired that you can't calm down and get something to play with, then we're going to go straight upstairs to bed as soon as I'm finished with dinner. Or if you keep crying and all that stuff, that's what we'll do. Take you straight upstairs. But if you calm down, we'll have a normal night. We'll read stories, play games, do what you want to do. How long do you think it took her for me walking away, for her to stop crying?
30 seconds.
I didn't even get 1 foot down. She stopped immediately because I had just trained her that I meant what I said. If youngsters know that you mean what you say, then they will know that you mean what you say when you say, I love you. I love you absolutely. And I demonstrate with every action that that's true. That doesn't mean I don't have standards, boundaries, and I'm not disciplined. This problem will never be solved unless we recognize we need to be disciplined about what we do in terms of the choices we make in our products, the things we do in our social lives, all of those kinds of things, and making sure that what I'm doing is the most sound thing I can do to move the needle forward on this. Remember that I live in the light, and I'm going to do the best I can today, Michael. Some of it will work and some of it will not, but at least I won't have to wonder what it felt like to be a contributor in the process.
So this, and I'm going to use this as a sort of a question to begin to bring the conversation to a close, simply because there's been so much in there. I'd almost rather people went back and listened to it again than listened to more.
Fine.
Are you hopeful?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because if
and I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, why?
Uh, well, because I've spent the last 40 years working with people who grab a hold of it. Some people, not all people, but a few in every group, some, not all. And I actually believe that the human spirit would love to have the feeling of knowing what it would be like to know that everybody in the world, to the best of our ability, has been taken care of tonight. We've collectively and societally done the things we need to do so that there is love and caring and the best we can possibly provide for as many of us as possible. And I believe people would love to know how that feels. I'll make it even more specific. Can you imagine having a meal, Michael, and knowing that hunger and starvation had been ended as an issue in the world? It had been ended. Can you imagine how eating would feel? It would feel differently, Michael. Okay. When we started working on that, 80,000 people a day died of hunger and starvation, mostly because every organization that worked in that field believed it was inevitable. The minute people started to realize it wasn't because it was inevitable, it was we were doing the wrong things. We weren't teaching people how to fish. We weren't giving them sustainable things. We were just providing food. That hasn't worked. Now there's only 20,000. We're getting there. We're moving in the right direction. But yet I believe I get in too many conversations where people actually get excited about the idea of having a world that works for everyone. And if you start talking to people, you will find 4 or 5 people who are really excited about the things we've talked about. And if you if you do nothing more than stopping speaking ill of other people, you'll feel a whole lot better about yourself. Do I have my moments where I wonder whether we'll pull this off? Of course I do, Michael. Of course I do. As my children have referred to this for 40 years. Oh, the old man's pulling himself through the eye of the needle again. Because every once in a while you get discouraged about what's going on. You asked me at the beginning of how something was going with the Vermont National Guard, where I've been working for 4 years. And I told you it's been put on hold for a month, or excuse me, for indefinitely, because Trump's building a wall between here and Mexico, and all the discretionary money went away. That could mean that those 4 years are gone, and we won't go any further. But you know what? I've already had all those conversations. The ones that got traction, I already know about some pretty powerful ones, really powerful ones, as a matter of fact. Would I love to have that not be in the way? Sure. But I also see too many things happening that are right. And we're in better shape now than we were before. All right. But the fact of the matter is we got to stop lying about the fact that we've solved it, because we haven't.
Yeah. Bill, it's just really nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Michael.
B, I'm grateful that the one thing I knew to do today was to host this conversation, and that you were up for coming on it. And I hope you'll come back again, and we'll talk more in this format. If people want to learn more about you and your work, is it theboothbyinstitute.org?
It is. Yep.
So please do check Bill's work out. And I hope you have gotten as much from this conversation as I have. Until next time, have fun, learn heaps, and I'll talk with you soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Michael.